In the quiet suburb of Ridgeview, Connecticut, the Gordon estate stood like a monument to perfection: white columns, trimmed hedges, marble floors that gleamed even in moonlight. Every Christmas, the family portrait hung above the grand staircase. Dorian and Catherine Gordon, their sons Cole and Tyson, and their daughter Aurora, smiling like nothing in the world could ever touch them. But behind that flawless picture, there was one secret they'd buried deeper than any scandal. A secret named Nia Copeland, the daughter Dorian never publicly claimed. For 20 years, the world knew Dorian Gordon as a respected businessman, the founder of Gordon Textiles, a company worth millions. When he died suddenly, in 2004, the reading of his will was swift and quiet. The estate, worth nearly $42 million, was divided among his legitimate heirs. No one outside the circle questioned it. No one except one young woman who'd spent her entire life asking why her father never came back. At 34, Nia Copeland had learned to live without answers. She worked as a senior accountant at Whitmore and Hale Financial, kept her life simple, and visited her late mother's grave every Sunday. Her mother had passed with one final wish: to let go of the Gordons. Nia tried to honor that. Until one spring afternoon, while sorting through her mother's things, she found something that stopped her cold. It was hidden behind the back of an old photo frame, the one that held a faded picture of her mother as a young nurse. When Nia pried open the frame, an envelope slid out, brittle and yellowed. On it, her name: Nia, if you ever doubt who you are. Inside was a letter written in her father's unmistakable cursive. The ink had faded, but the words were clear. If this finds you, it means Catherine and the children already have what I left behind. I want you to know, I didn't forget you. I added your name to my will, and I left instructions for you to be cared for. If anyone changes this will, or hides your existence, Clause 9b will activate. The key enclosed will lead you to proof. At the bottom, his signature: Dorian Gordon. Her pulse quickened. She pulled out a small, tarnished safe deposit key taped to the bottom of the letter. For hours she just sat there, staring at the key as if it could speak. That night, rain beat against her apartment windows. She didn't sleep. By morning she had made her decision. At Hartley Savings Bank, the clerk took her ID and led her to a quiet vault. The key fit perfectly into box hash 217, untouched for 2 decades. When she opened it, a gust of old air escaped, as if the past itself had been sealed inside. Inside the box were several documents: original copies of Dorian's will, notarized carbon sheets, and a sealed codicil stamped with the name James Fuller, Esquire. She also found a small cassette tape labeled for Nia, "Only If They Forget You." She didn't play it yet. She took everything, placed it in her leather bag, and left. At home, she laid the papers on her kitchen table. The codicil read like something out of a legal thriller. In the event any beneficiary or counsel conceals, or alters the rightful list of heirs, the estate shall immediately revert to a trust governed by an independent board for 20 years. The concealed heir shall assume executor rights, under the character clause provision. It was signed, stamped, and dated exactly 6 days before his death. Nia covered her mouth, her eyes burning. Her father hadn't just left her something, he'd built a weapon disguised as mercy. Later that evening she drove to Mount Ivy Cemetery and stood before his grave. The wind tugged at her coat, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain. She knelt, brushing away the leaves from the headstone. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. "You knew they'd erase me." Her eyes hardened. "But you gave me the tools to fix it." That night, Nia reached out to Dr. Margot Cabrera, a forensic document examiner she'd once audited at Whitmore and Hale. Within days, Cabrera confirmed what Nia already suspected. Dorian's signature was authentic, but the copy on record at the county archive had been altered. Someone had removed an entire heir page and resubmitted it with new signatures. Nia's stomach twisted. The lawyer James Fuller had been one of her father's oldest friends. When she called his office, his assistant said he was retired and unavailable for contact. But Nia didn't believe in unavailable. She booked a train to Boston, where Fuller lived in a brownstone on Park Street. She stood at his gate for 10 minutes before knocking. When he opened the door, his face went pale, as if he'd seen a ghost. He tried to speak, but she raised the letter. "You remember your signature, Mr. Fuller?" He stammered something about misunderstandings and family complications. She didn't argue. She simply set the codicil on his mahogany desk and whispered the words that would haunt him for weeks. "You signed it too." She left before he could respond. That night, Fuller poured himself a drink and stared at the document she'd brought, the date, the clause, the ink. It was all there. For the first time in 20 years he realized the past wasn't done with them. 2 days after confronting James Fuller, Nia Copeland received an unmarked envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside were photocopies of the forged version of Dorian Gordon's will, the one the world believed. The page that should have listed heirs had been replaced entirely. The paper newer than the rest, the signatures faintly off. Someone had been desperate to erase her. Her hands trembled as she compared it to her father's original copy from the safe deposit box. The differences screamed betrayal: missing line spacing, a shifted margin, the faint shadow where the carbon paper had once been. Whoever had done it hadn't just forged a document, they'd rewritten bloodlines. She didn't cry. She called Dr. Margot Cabrera, the document examiner, and asked for a full report, UV scans, ink tests, embossing traces. Margot agreed to fast-track the case for a steep fee. When the results came back, they told the story Dorian had anticipated. The forgery isn't amateur, Margot explained over coffee at a small diner near Hartford. The signature on the altered page was traced over a light table. The ink is a decade newer. The typewriter imprints match the lawyer's old Smith Corona, except the pressure on the letter R. It's faint. Probably done by someone else. Nia nodded slowly. Someone in that house. Margot leaned forward. You could go to the police. Nia looked out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. No, she said. There's a clause in the will for this. He saw it coming. That night, she studied the documents at her dining table. Every signature, every staple mark, every faint indentation. The codicil mentioned a reversion clause, something even Margot had called genius-level legal foresight. It read, should any heir or counsel alter or conceal the rightful record, all assets revert to a trust overseen by independent management. The concealed heir shall serve as executor of character until full moral restoration is observed. Executor of character. The title sounded almost biblical. A week later, Nia's email pinged, a response from Pritchard and Rowe Trust Department, the same institution named in the codicil. She'd attached the scanned documents, the authenticity report, and the letter from her father. Their reply was short. We confirm the clause exists in our archive. Please be advised, activation requires notarized verification of tampering and identity confirmation of the concealed heir. If you wish to proceed, we will open arbitration case #9043 under the Gordon Family Trust. Nia exhaled. It was happening. By the time the formal letters went out, the Gordons were blindsided. Cole Gordon, now CEO of Gordon Textiles, received the notice first. His assistant brought it in during a board meeting. The moment he saw arbitration of reversion clause, his face drained of color. At the Gordon estate, Catherine, the matriarch, paced her drawing room, her pearl necklace trembling in her fingers. Who is this woman claiming to be Dorian's heir? She demanded. That clause was hypothetical. He'd never let this happen. Her younger daughter, Aurora, bit her lip. Mom, Dad did spend those weekends in Boston before he met you. Catherine spun around. Don't you dare. Meanwhile, Nia kept quiet, moving carefully. No interviews, no lawyers of her own. She didn't need spectacle. Her father had built her defense 20 years ago. A week later, she was summoned to Hamilton Hall arbitration chambers in New Haven. The oak-paneled room smelled of dust and mahogany polish. On one side sat 3 arbitrators from the trust department. On the other, the Gordon family, Catherine, Cole, Tyson, and Aurora, all dressed in somber black like a public relations performance. Cole stood first, voice dripping with restraint. This entire claim is absurd. My father was a perfectionist. He would never risk a clause that could dismantle everything he built. The head arbitrator raised a hand. Mr. Gordon, we are not debating preferences. We are validating a legal mechanism signed and witnessed by your father's own counsel. All eyes turned to James Fuller, who sat 2 rows behind the family, pale and sweating. His voice cracked. The clause was genuine. A collective murmur filled the room. Catherine glared at him like a queen betrayed. Nia said nothing. She opened her leather folder and handed over the UV scan report, notarized and signed by Dr. Cabrera. The arbitrator examined it, then stamped the final page. We hereby acknowledge activation of Reversion Clause 9B, under the Gordon estate. Effective immediately, ownership and management transfer to the independent trust. Miss Nia Copeland is hereby appointed executive trustee. Cole slammed his hand on the table. You can't just, the arbitrator cut him off. The clause is clear, tampering voids entitlement. Catherine's voice broke. You don't understand what this will do to us. Nia finally spoke, voice soft but unyielding. It's already done. That night, news rippled quietly through Ridgeview. The Gordons had lost control of their own fortune, not to the government, not to scandal, but to a clause their patriarch wrote himself. And yet, there were no headlines, no sirens, no police, just paperwork. Cold, clean, final. At home, Nia placed her father's letter in a frame beside the original codicil. She whispered the line she'd soon become known for, softly almost to herself. No police, no prison, just a clause that forced every liar to serve the truth in public. She poured herself a glass of water and looked out her window. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel erased. She felt inevitable. The Gordon family had always been skilled at one thing: appearance. They knew how to turn disaster into dinner talk, and betrayal into branding. But nothing could polish what was coming. 3 weeks after the arbitration ruling, the Gordons held their annual legacy gala, a tradition that marked 20 years since Dorian's death and the supposed continuity of his empire. Guests filled the ballroom at the Ridgeview Country Manor, sipping champagne under chandeliers, while the string quartet played Dorian's favorite waltz. Every speech, every toast, was a performance, an attempt to convince investors and the local press that nothing had changed. But something had. At the center of the grand dining table sat Catherine Gordon, regal in black satin and diamonds, her son Cole beside her, trying to smile as photographers snapped away. Tayson leaned against the marble column, expression tight. Aurora kept her head low, scrolling through messages on her phone. Hey, sit me squirty enough. When the orchestra paused, Catherine stood, tapping her glass. To family, she said, her voice steady. To legacy, to 20 years of excellence, untouched, unshaken, unbreakable. The crowd applauded, and then the doors opened. Nia Copeland walked in quietly. No entourage, no lawyer. Just her and a slim folder clutched in her hand. Her black dress was modest, her heels soft on the marble floor. Yet her presence shifted the air in the room like a storm before thunder. The quartet stopped playing. Waiters froze. Cameras turned. Cole's jaw tightened. She wouldn't dare, he muttered under his breath. But she did. She walked to the center of the room, stopping beside the table where the family crest gleamed in gold embroidery. Good evening, she said. Her voice was calm, low, almost kind. I didn't mean to interrupt, though I suppose it's tradition, isn't it? The Gordons celebrating another year of pretending. The crowd went still. Catherine rose halfway, her smile brittle. This is a private event. I know, Nia said, her eyes meeting hers. So was the reading of my father's real will. She placed the folder on the table and opened it. You all remember Clause 9b. Cole's face went white. Tayson's hand twitched. Aurora's phone slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the floor. Your father, Nia continued, left a clause for tampering. A clause for greed. And tonight by law, it's activated. The guests whispered. Some raised their phones, recording. She unfolded the first page of the codicil, the trust department's stamp gleaming under the chandelier. Effective as of last week, Gordon Textiles and its assets have been transferred to a trust overseen by independent management. Every heir's inheritance is suspended. All financial privileges are now contingent on behavioral review. Gasps rippled through the hall. And one more thing, Nia said. The trust board has appointed me executive trustee, which means I'm not here as a guest. I'm here as your supervisor. Cole lunged forward, his chair scraping the floor. You think this makes you powerful? You're nothing but careful, she cut in, her tone razor smooth. Anger counts against your quarterly review. Laughter erupted from one corner of the room, the nervous, stifled kind. Catherine's hand trembled. You humiliate us in front of our friends. You destroy your father's name. Nia's expression didn't change. I'm protecting his name. You destroyed his integrity. You forgot what legacy meant. Tayson's voice broke. This isn't justice. No, she replied softly. It's balance. Then she reached into her folder and laid the next page flat. Clause 9b states, clearly no police, no prison, just just a clause that forces every liar to serve the truth in public. Her words echoed through the marble room like a verdict. For a moment silence, then chaos. Reporters outside caught the sound of shouting through the doors, Cole arguing with his mother, Aurora crying into her napkin, Tyson storming out. Nia gathered her papers calmly, turned toward the crowd, and gave a small nod. The trust board will issue a public statement tomorrow. Tonight's footage will serve as verification. When she walked out, no one stopped her, not even security. Outside, the night air was sharp with rain. Cameras flashed, but she didn't flinch. Inside, Catherine's credit card was declined before dessert arrived. Cole's company issued phone buzzed with a notification, access revoked. By morning the headlines read, "The Gordon heir no one knew, the clause that changed everything," and by noon every business partner had seen the footage. But the most painful punishment wasn't financial, it was visible. Within 48 hours, the Gordon mansion gates were opened to auditors, trustees, and historians cataloging every artifact for public viewing. Their family crest was stripped from the company letterhead. Invitations to their social circles quietly vanished. In the eyes of the world, the Gordons were no longer powerful, they were studied. And Nia, for the first time in her life, wasn't hidden behind a locked door, she was the one holding the key. By the following month, Ridgeview had a new attraction, one the Gordons never meant to create. A bronze plaque now hung at the entrance of the family's once private estate, Gordon Heritage Center, open to the public every Sunday. The gates that once guarded silence now swung open to busloads of students, retirees, and journalists eager to witness the empire that collapsed without a single courtroom or police badge. Inside, the transformation was complete. The east wing of the mansion had been converted into a scholarship and apprenticeship center, lined with framed photos of Dorian Gordon, alongside new displays about ethics and legacy. Each exhibit bore the same line beneath it, curated by the Gordon Trust, under executive trustee Nia Copeland. For the family, it was humiliation dressed in politeness. On the first open day, Cole Gordon, the former CEO, stood by the front door in a tailored suit that no longer meant anything. The trust required one family member present at each public event, as a truth representative. It wasn't just policy, it was part of the character clause. He greeted visitors through clenched teeth as they toured the house he once owned, snapping photos beside the display that exposed his own forgery. His former assistant walked past with a camera crew whispering, "That's him, right? The one who lost everything." Cole smiled for the photo. The cameras caught the smile, not the fury. Upstairs, Aurora Gordon gave her required lecture to a group of college interns about transparency and stewardship. Every word she read had been written by the trust's ethics board. Each sentence burned her throat, but she couldn't afford defiance. Her stipend depended on attendance. Meanwhile, Catherine Gordon, still elegant but diminished, supervised the new Truth Gallery, a corridor where the real will, codicil, and legal documents were displayed under glass. Her signature, forged on the fraudulent version, glared back at her from every frame. Each Sunday she had to stand by that glass case and answer questions from visitors about how a family can lose its moral compass. She wore pearls and dignity like armor, but humiliation had a way of finding cracks. One afternoon, a little boy asked innocently, "Mrs. Gordon, did you really forget about your sister?" Catherine froze. Then, in a voice that barely escaped her throat, she said, "Yes, I did." And the boy smiled, as if she'd given the right answer. Every month, the trust board released performance reviews. The Gordon stipends were tied to their character growth, a polite phrase for obedience. Their spending limits were capped at $3,000 per month, with every transaction publicly logged. A single luxury purchase meant temporary suspension. The once invincible family, who had thrown charity galas for tax deductions, now served soup at shelters to meet their community service quotas. Catherine hated every minute of it. Cole endured it with mechanical grace. Aurora surprisingly adapted. She found comfort in the children she mentored at the scholarship center. Even Tyson, the youngest, started attending counseling sessions at Nia's suggestion, finally confronting the weight of the family's deceit. But none of it compared to the punishment reserved for James Fuller, the lawyer who'd helped forge the will. His law license wasn't revoked, just restricted. The Bar Association issued a public censure and ordered 400 hours of mandatory pro bono work, under the supervision of the very Legal Aid Foundation his deceit had once funded. Every week, He sat at a folding desk in a community hall, helping low-income families write wills, each stamped with his name, and the words Certified Ethics Rehabilitation. The humiliation was endless, but Nia didn't gloat. She visited the mansion only when required by the trust board. She didn't crave revenge, she managed it. Her satisfaction came from silence, from watching the truth work like medicine, slow, bitter, necessary. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all pressed on her. Late at night, in her apartment, she'd replay her father's cassette, the one marked for Nia. "If you're hearing this," Dorian's voice said, "it means you found the truth. I didn't build this clause for revenge. I built it for remembrance, so they'd learn that justice isn't always a punishment, it's a mirror." His voice cracked at the end. "Make them see the reflection, sweetheart." She pressed pause and closed her eyes. Outside, the mansion lights glowed in the distance, where Catherine stood before the plaque, greeting guests with a smile that no longer reached her eyes. Months later, the humiliation took a new form, a televised broadcast. The Gordon Legacy Forum, a monthly event, was streamed online. The family sat on stage, microphones clipped, answering questions from students about morality and greed. Every session ended the same way, with a required reading of Dorian's character clause. Cole's voice trembled each time he read the line. No police, no prison, just a clause that forces every liar to serve the truth in public. The words had become a sentence, an anthem of accountability that echoed louder than any punishment could, and the audience always applauded. Because for the first time in Ridgeview's history, justice wasn't behind bars, it was on display. By late autumn, the Gordon estate no longer looked like a monument to greed, it looked like a living museum of consequences. The marble floors were still spotless, the chandeliers still glimmered, but the sound that now filled the halls was laughter. Children's laughter echoing through rooms that had once hosted silence and scandal. Nia Copeland stood at the balcony overlooking the East Wing, watching a group of high schoolers gather for the Gordon Apprenticeship Program's annual essay review. The room was bright and alive, students in second-hand blazers reading essays about honesty, legacy, and courage. She smiled faintly. This was what her father had meant. Below her, the former heirs moved among the visitors, each one learning what humility actually felt like. Cole Gordon had become the unspoken face of the family's redemption. The trust board had given him a new role, program coordinator for the youth division. He'd fought it at first, but he was good at it. The man who once signed off millions without blinking now, handed out coffee, checked attendance, and smiled, genuinely for the first time in years. Cora, too, had changed. Her weekly integrity and leadership workshops drew more attendees than anyone expected. She'd even proposed turning one of the guest houses into a mentorship dorm for students from struggling families. The board approved. As for Catherine Gordon, she still carried herself like a matriarch, but time had softened her pride. Her pearls remained, but her tone had gentled. She spent her afternoons in the Truth Gallery, guiding small groups through the exhibits. She didn't just tell them what happened, she owned it. Once a young visitor asked, "Mrs. Gordon, what's the hardest thing you've had to do?" Catherine paused beside the glass case, displaying the real will. "Admitting that I wasn't protecting a legacy," she said softly. "I was protecting my ego." Her voice didn't shake. For the first time, she sounded human. The trust's success rippled beyond Ridgeview. Newspapers praised it as the most civil form of justice America has seen. Universities sent researchers to study the character clause, calling it a model for ethical inheritance. And through it all, Nia refused interviews. She turned down every request. "The story isn't mine," she told them. "It's his." But fate had one more page to turn. One evening, while reviewing old correspondence in the mansion's archive, Nia discovered a small envelope tucked behind a drawer. The handwriting was familiar, her father's again. It was addressed to Cole Gordon, dated 1 week before Dorian's death. Her chest tightened as she unfolded it. "Cole, if you're reading this, I want you to remember what I taught you. A name means nothing if it doesn't stand for something. Should this clause ever trigger, it means I've failed to raise sons who understood character. You must choose redemption over resentment. Find her, work with her. She carries my heart, you carry my name." The paper trembled in Nia's hand. She sat there for a long time, the sound of the old clock filling the silence. Then quietly, she went downstairs. Cole was closing up after the scholarship event. When she handed him the letter, he read it twice before looking up, eyes red-rimmed. He wrote this to me. Yes, she said softly. He wanted us to finish what he started. Cole nodded slowly. Then I guess, this trust isn't punishment anymore. It's correction. Mia smiled. That's what he called it. The following Sunday marked the one-year anniversary of the trust activation. The estate hosted its largest open house yet. Hundreds of guests, donors and students from across the state. A brass band played on the lawn, and food stalls lined the driveway. At noon the Gordon family gathered for the traditional reading of the character clause. This time there was no stiffness, no anger, just acceptance. Cole stood at the podium, flanked by Aurora and Catherine, and read the familiar words. No police, no prison, just a clause that forced every liar to serve the truth in public. The crowd erupted in applause, not for the fall, but for what came after it, the rebuilding, the humility, the grace. As the guests dispersed, Mia stepped outside to the veranda, where the autumn sun painted the lawns gold. The air smelled of cedar and rain. She looked toward the horizon, where the town's skyline shimmered faintly in the distance. Her father's voice echoed in memory. Justice isn't always punishment, it's a mirror. Behind her, laughter swelled again. Children ran up the marble steps, clutching essays and notebooks. One of them, a girl with freckles and tangled hair, paused and asked shyly, "Miss Copeland, is it true you changed the whole family with just one letter?" Naza smiled gently. "No, sweetheart," she said. "The letter changed itself. I just opened it." The girl grinned and ran off. Naya turned back toward the plaque at the entrance, sunlight catching on the engraved words, "Justice without jail." She traced the edge of the metal with her fingertips and whispered, "They wanted to bury me with the will. Instead I became its voice." The camera would linger there if this were a film. Her figure framed against the glowing mansion, the sounds of community rising where silence once lived. No police, no prison, just a clause, and the truth finally served in public.